and welcome to another episode of Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick, and as always, we like to talk about things related to business continuity, disaster planning, emergency management, cybersecurity, resiliency, anything that's relatable to those subjects in that industry. I'd like to remind everyone that if there is a topic you'd like us to talk about on the show, or you'd like to be a guest, or have someone else come on the show, please feel free. Go to the VoiceAmerica page for the show. There is a button that says send the host an email or something along those words. And I do get all emails, and I do respond to everything. And we'll see about finding someone or yourself to come on and talk about the subject. Today's topic, we're going to be focusing on developing cyber exercises that help prepare your organization for the impact of a cyber incident. And today's guest, many of you may know, she has been on the show. I think this is actually the fourth appearance on the show, but only the second full episode. But I know, like I said, many of you probably know who it is. And I'd like to welcome back to the show once again, Regina Phelps. Regina, welcome back to the show.
Alex, thank you so much for this kind introduction, and it's great to be starting off 2020 with you.
Yeah, I think so too.
That's great.
It's glad I'm happy to have you back on the show. You always bring lots of knowledge and insight every time we chat, so it's a pleasure to have you back, and I'm glad you were able to find time to come and talk with us today.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Believe it or not, there might be one or two listeners out there who may not know, who Regina Phelps is. Can you take a minute or so and just kind of give us a quick bio as to what you do and how you got into the industry?
Sure, happy to do that. So my firm has been in practice since 1982, so this is our 38th year in business. And essentially, if I was to summarize what we do, is we help companies prepare for crises and the worst possible day of their company's life. So my firm essentially does crisis management, business continuity, and exercise design for multinational companies. We work in 5 continents. One of my key areas of expertise is in designing exercises. I do about 100 large exercises a year. And since the cyber threat has become so prevalent in the last 10 years, we started doing cyber exercises probably 7 years ago, starting on impact, really focusing on impact. And since that time, I would say of my 100 or so that I personally design a year, I would say at least 40 of them. This year will probably be 50 are about a cyber-related incident. So whether it's a ransomware attack, a denial of service, or some other form of malware affecting a system, and essentially really making a company really drop to its knees. And unfortunately, in our client population, and these are large multinational corporations, we have seen this repeatedly over the last 5 years, and increasing in severity and really crippling. And so our goal today really is to sort of show how you can design an exercise that is going to really help somebody really design something that will make it so powerful that a company will really understand what they need to do to prepare for the impact of a possible cyber event.
Well, great. I'm looking forward to talking about that because, everyone's talking about cyber threats, and you've already said, 50% of what you're doing is now almost based on these cyber threats. But this morning, I did come up with a question, and I know I quickly touched base before we came on the air. I just wanted to ask this question because it popped into my head. A few years ago, we used to call this cyber threat area information security or information security protection or data protection, something along those lines. And now we're calling it cyber threats. And I'm just kind of wondering what's changed in the industry to make us, change what we're saying, from information security to cyber threats. In your opinion?
It's a great question. Yeah, that's a great question. So first of all, I'm not a technologist, but I hang in that space a lot now because of this work. And what I will say to you is that information security is still the catch-all phrase for the majority of this work. But I think there was an evolution that began maybe 5 or 6 years ago where the term cyber is something that kind of everybody seems to understand what that means. It has to do with the internet. It has to do with things being shared on all of these networks that we possess. And so the idea is I started to see in my client population, instead of referring to things as information security, which, could be paper, it could be simply something restricted to your own environment, that the idea of attaching the word cyber threat, really begins to tell more of a global picture. So people can then say, gosh, you're really probably talking about somebody who might actually intrude into your network, or somebody who might introduce some piece of malware, or be doing something destructive to a company. So to me, that's how I've seen this evolve. Information security, I think, is still widely used, but it's really for the technologists. It's really for the technology professionals. Once you get beyond them, you start talking cyber, everybody knows what you're talking about.
Okay. Well, that's a great answer, because I know some people have mentioned that. Even a couple of people I work with, were kind of, well, what's the difference? So I'm glad to hear your opinion on that. So let's jump in. Let's jump into our topic today, and the cyber exercises. Now, there's all kinds of, when we talk about our business continuity plans, there's different ways of doing component testing, tabletop testing, simulations, etc. How on earth do you do a cyber exercise?
It is really an important topic. And in fact, it was so important to me that I wrote my third book, How to Develop a Cyber Exercise, about this very issue. Because I think, Alex, it's actually fraught with peril. And what do I mean by that? I've seen people actually do exercises, and because of the serious nature of this event, and because there's a tendency or a possibility where there could be finger pointing in a company, or blame, like, how did that information security team not protect us? Or what was technology thinking? Which I've actually seen happen in an exercise. So I think the important thing is that a cyber exercise needs to be something that is designed with a lot of forethought. And there's a couple of really important things that I think all of your listeners need to immediately do whenever they decide that they're going to want to perform a cyber exercise, which I would highly encourage every one of your listeners to do. And the first two things are super, super important. The first thing I would say is they really need to obtain senior management support. What do I mean by that? Senior management, of course, your executives, they spend a lot of time and money, right, funding all of these programs in information security. And so there's an expectation, frankly, that they have that, it's going to work, right? There's not going to be an issue.
Yeah.
And the last thing you want to have happen is to introduce something in an exercise, and then the executive thinks like, oh my gosh, I've spent all this money. This still happened. How could that be? Well, it could happen easily, to be honest. And so I need them to understand it's going to be messy, it's going to be problematic, and you're going to have lots of mistakes, and it's all good. So that's the first thing that's super important.
Okay. What's
the second thing is the second thing is the technology department needs to understand that you personally, as the designer of your exercise, is not going to throw them under the bus.
Why would you say that?
Well, because I think sometimes what happens is that when you start digging into really design a cyber exercise, you're going to find a lot of things that aren't fixed, aren't right, aren't done. That's in every technology department, in every company, everywhere. And so those things are going to likely or potentially come out. And then people would say, well, Alex, you're in charge of that department. How did you not fix that? Or why didn't you fix that? And it could be a zillion reasons, right? It could be funding. It could be equipment. It could be a ton of things. And I want them to understand it's not about casting blame anywhere. It's about us showing what needs to get done, which frankly can help a technology department get more support, more funding, and more what they need in order to really tighten all those bolts and really cover all those big holes that exist in every technology department of any company of any size.
So you're kind of turning it to something positive. If we do this, this is the benefits you guys could get out of it, regardless of the results, right? That kind of a thing?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, and for them to, and you need them to be a willing player in design, because I want them to tell me where all of the bodies are buried. I want them to tell me where we have issues of exposure, because frankly, if I can highlight that in an exercise, it's going to help them, it's going to help the company, and the net is it's all good. But I want people to understand I am not doing this to pick on you by you having not completed or cleaned up this particular issue. And so if you start, first of all, with those two premises, that you want to make sure that the executives know it's going to be messy, and the technology people know that you're not going to throw them under the bus and you're there to help them, that's going to help you in the design. It's going to help you in the exercise. And when you issue your after action report, it's going to be super helpful because people are going to see all the good things that were exposed and what they can do to be better.
Isn't that kind of scary, though, to know that you could find things that, well, I guess I forget who it was, Donald Rumsfeld or something. I think it said, you may find known knowns, unknown unknowns, and things like that. That can be really scary for anybody involved, couldn't it?
It is. And I will tell you, that's why I think these two conversations at the beginning of a design are so important, because people, frankly, are going to be shocked at what is discovered. And again, I would just say I've done now probably 500 of these in the last 10 years. And I will say to you that I'm always like, oh, my God, really? But yes, either they didn't have funding, or it's an old piece of legacy equipment and it's scheduled to be replaced, or whatever it is. And yet everybody knows it. Often everybody knows it. But you know how it is when you know something, but you think, oh, yeah, but that's not really going to happen, is it? And so then they basically don't make those changes, or they try and make it last longer or whatever. And so, again, these two component pieces are super, super important, because that will help you get the best results out of your exercise.
How do you go about getting, I can understand the IT side, working in IT and having worked on the BU side of things. How do you get executives to really buy into this if they've got, because you mentioned the word expectations. So they already have a set level of expectations. How do you convince them that, we will find, let's say, gaps, and sometimes they're the ones who might actually feel as though the finger's being pointed at them. How do you go about dealing with them?
That's a really great question. So there's a couple of things. I think what I would say, first of all, is that any CEO I've interviewed in the last 5 years, the number one thing that leaves them sleepless at night is what we're talking about today. They're hugely concerned about a cyber incident, something that's going to significantly impact their organization, and what they're ultimately concerned about is reputation and brand. And so what I try and do is I try to work with them on several levels. First of all, as I want to talk with them, and I want to find out, when I interview them, I want to find out what is the thing that you are most concerned about. So, because if I understand that, I call it the silly little question. If I deeply understand what's really concerning you about a cyber event, then I'm going to design an exercise that's going to drill a hole right through that. Because I want to deliver for you exactly what your biggest fear is, so that way we can work through it and try and solve it. So that's the first thing I do, is I try and get them to understand deeply what they really are bothered by. And then secondarily, once I know that, I can also then tie that to stories that are well known within contemporary times, going back to things like the Sony event or the NotPetya that affected, oh my gosh, hundreds of companies, several huge companies. One of our clients almost lost $1 billion. And that's all public information. So there's a lot of things that I can tie that back to say, look, these companies in NotPetya, they were well prepared. They're huge. FedEx, Maersk, Merck, tons of them. And yet they had this incredible, debilitating experience. That could happen to you. And actually, one of my favorite quotes about that in particular was something that McAfee said in a report they issued in 2016. And they said this, and this is something I like to say to every executive. We need to accept that we will never eliminate all risk, that nothing is permanently safe. And even if we could, it would be far too expensive. So what that says clearly is that the risks are never going to be completely eliminated. And if you could, you would never spend that kind of money, because you would do a risk ratio analysis and you would say to yourself, oh, come on, I'm not going to spend, X, because the chances are Y. And that's what every executive does, frankly, every day. right?
Right. Wow.
Right.
It's almost scary, with what you just said here, knowing that you can't reduce, or eliminate all the risk,
Right.
even though I've worked in program and project management as well, where that's exactly what they try to do, and it can't be done.
Right, of course.
So to get everyone on the same page, though, that's got to be tough for them to all understand that we are going to find gaps, we are going to find errors.
Yes.
Is
yes.
the scary part the finding of the errors or the scale of the errors, the impact?
I think actually it can be both. I think, first of all, I think it's almost like a graduated experience. The first conversation I'm going to have with them is, I need your support, and we're going to find a lot of problems. And I need you as the senior executives to stand up and applaud how great that is, because that's how we're going to fix it. So that's kind of the awareness. And then the second piece is, once we get into the design, I can find lots of issues that we're going to have and we're going to focus on that will really serve the business ultimately, but also expose lots of problems. And then when you actually go through the experience of the exercise, that's when it becomes highly personal. And I let them know that at the very beginning. And one of the things that I do, Alex, when I design these exercises is I design them in a very experiential way. And let me just talk for a moment about that, because I will tell you, if I can make somebody feel this in their gut, I can actually change that company's whole strategy about continuity planning and technology-related issues, because they're going to walk out of that room with the biggest headache they've ever had in their life, and that's going to make me super happy. And to do that, you essentially need to have two things in your exercise design. You need to have really good design teams, which I'll talk about, and then you also want to make sure you have a fully simulated exercise. So let me just touch on those really quickly. And when we design exercises like this, I'm an exercise design specialist. I've designed, I think, something like 5,000 exercises in my 37 years. I am not, however, a specialist in your company, but I can design exercises till the cows come home. So I need to have the best people that can help me develop the story. So I need a technology design team who helps me design all the technology issues and failures. And then I need a business unit design team that will dance, if you will, with that narrative of issues like, files missing, network goes down, Active Directory disappears, website goes down, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's interesting from a technology perspective, but what's the impact of that? What does the business feel? That tells the story. And so I work with these two design teams to develop the actual exercise.
Well,
but then the second part.
We've come to the first segment already, would you believe?
So
we're going to dig deeper into those design teams in just a second, but we do have to take a break, unfortunately. We're talking today with Regina Phelps, and we're talking about designing exercises, cyber exercises, and the impacts that they can have. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the show. Today we are talking once again with Regina Phelps, and we're talking about cyber exercises and the impact they can have cyber incidents can have on your organization. Regina, I know I had to cut you off just because of the break, and you were talking about the design teams. Can you continue on and elaborate on those?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So when I am designing an exercise, as I mentioned in the last segment, we start with two design teams, the technology team and the business unit team. Let me talk about the technology team first. In that particular group, what I need is and I'll use the term right people from your technology department to help me design something that is specifically spot on. Who would those people likely be? Well, first of all, they can't be in the exercise, of course, right? So they can't know everything before we do it. I'm looking for somebody that really has a good understanding of the network, of the major applications and databases, also somebody that understands your infrastructure, and there might be other specialized components of your organization that might be important. Generally, that team is about 6, 7, 8 people, something like that. And sometimes if you have an organization, like we do a lot of work in central banks, and they have some very specific applications like Swift, for example. In that particular case, we would have the Swift person participate because it is a complicated and third-party interface application. So they're going to design for us basically the failures, as I call it. So the first meeting I have with them, I kind of look them all deep in the eyes and say, so do you think a cyber incident could happen here? They normally look down at the desk for a while, and then they look up at me and say, yeah, of course. And then I say, great, okay, good. Well, tell me, how do you think that could happen? And then we brainstorm. Okay, maybe it was a phishing attack. Maybe it was a piece of malware that came in from a third-party vendor. Or maybe it was somebody still using thumb drives and introducing a foreign piece of malware or whatever it is. And then essentially the idea is, okay, what would that do? You know, and so if you imagine it's the case of malware, you know, how long would it be in the system and how would it populate across the network and blah, blah, blah. That's all background information that they'll never know in the exercise. But from the design perspective, we all need to understand kind of those kind of how it happens things. And then we sort of talk about, well, okay, let's say we're doing ransomware. Okay, great. And let's say it's a 0-day form of ransomware. Great. That means it's not detected by your security software. Great. That's wonderful. Okay, super. So now it moves around and then they have a detonation switch and it all deploys. And it starts taking down servers, desktops, brings down your network, blah, 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 blah. Great. Oh, wonderful. Let's time that all out. So we essentially start and we develop what I call the bones of the exercise. If the exercise runs from 8 to 12, I can say, okay, great. 8:01, this happened. Files were not available. 8:05, server number 1 goes down. That affects these certain applications. Blah, 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 blah. The website goes down. A network goes down. Essentially doing that kind of stuff. So I work with that team over the span of about 3 meetings. They're about 90 minutes apiece. And we map out the entire thing. And they actually have a great time doing it, interestingly enough, which I think is so funny. Then, once they're happy with all the destruction that they have created, then we basically sit down with the business unit and say, okay, we're going to have a cyber exercise. You're sworn to secrecy. You can't tell anybody about it. I need you to tell me the impact of your department, your critical business process when these things happen. Oh, my goodness. We brainstorm, we talk, we discuss, and then over the span of about 3 phone calls, usually what we do is about 90 minutes apiece, we design what are called the exercise injects, which are those things you insert into the exercise that move the story along. You start with a baseline narrative, and then what tells the player, the exercise player, what's going on are these injects that are inserted into the exercise, which could be things like Active Directory goes down or network failed or key applications not available, and then they have to react to that kind of create an inject. So it's super precise and exact for that particular business, and that's what creates that really valuable experience.
So, well, it's interesting you said, does that work for small, medium, and large companies? Because I know some companies that if you had 6-8 people, you'd have over half their IT department.
Yes, very true. So in some cases, that you're absolutely right, Alex, that in a really smaller company, they may have 20 people and I wanted 5 of them or 10 of them, right? So the thing I would say to you is if you have a small organization and you can't have people design it and not play, the thing I would say to you is that if you remember back in the old days when there was Men in Black where they would hold up that device and it would erase their memory, Yeah. That's essentially what you would want to. That's what you would want to do with our technology professionals if they had to play. And in reality, I'll be honest with you, in a really well-designed cyber exercise, I'm not really exercising as much of the technology department as I am the crisis management team and the business units. So if the technology have to engage to help me have the best exercise and they have to play, I don't prefer it, but I can certainly do it and have done it.
I guess that kind of links back to what you said keeps executives up at night regarding cyber threats, and that's brand and reputation. So if you're to get that, you would have to focus, I guess, on the crisis management side of the cyber threat, right?
Right. So when we design exercises, and that's a great question, Alex, when we design exercises, we design them and basically with 3 different groups in mind. And sometimes the exercise is only for a particular group. So I've done many exercises that only involve the executives. So if you imagine a very large corporation and they've got 7 people in the C-suite, they're the only players in that exercise. That exercise is completely different than the one I would design for the next group down, which would be the tactical crisis management team, who are actually working to solve the issues in real time. They're the boots on the ground, managing the impacts to the business and so on. And then the third kind of exercise you could design is one for the business units, where they're actually pulling out their business continuity plan to see if there's any guidance for them once this cyber event has occurred. And those are 3 totally different designs, and I could talk at length about any one of them. But I want to talk about one thing, and be sure you don't let me talk over again. So one thing that's important that you just mentioned is the okay, good, thank you, is the risk in the brand issue. Every executive I've talked to said, this leaves me sleepless at night. So what does that mean for you as the designer of your exercise? That means that in this exercise, it has to become public knowledge. So I'm not talking about really putting this out on Twitter, but in my cyber executive world of my exercise, we're going to have this event become public. Because if you have a cyber event that impacts your company, the vast majority of them are never disclosed to the public unless it violates some law. Many cyber events, if you have a complete takedown of your systems, unless it becomes public, you're never going to have to talk about reputation and brand. You're never going to have to issue crisis communications. You're never going to have to respond to Twitter. And in a real event, that's what's going to happen. So we always make sure that in our exercise, when they're worried about reputation and brand, there's a huge component of it where it gets out on Twitter. It starts becoming trending on Twitter or Facebook, or it's picked up by the local news agencies, or maybe you're a big enough company that Bloomberg wants to talk about you. So then they have to then develop the response.
Would it be beneficial to have all 3 of those groups, the BU, IT, and execs, participate in the same exercise? Or is it better to have 3 individual first and then graduate to a combined,
that's a really great
exercise?
Question. It's a great question. And I will tell you that my preference is this. My preference is actually you would sort of start in this order. And I would keep them separate until we had some legs underneath us, meaning that we had some awareness about what your condition of your program was, et cetera. So the way I would encourage your listeners to do this is I would start with the crisis management team. That's the tactical team, not the executive. If you're a smaller firm, I understand it includes everybody, but I'm looking at a larger company where they would be these 3 segments that would be individual. The crisis management team is going to deal with the tactical related issues and kind of managing the overall event. It's really important that they get their experience and their legs underneath them to kind of understand what it even means when this happens. Then I would be inclined to take it to the business units. And the best way to do a business unit exercise is not individual business units one at a time. The way that you can get far more out of this, if you imagine you have a large conference room, and let's say you've got 10 critical business units, I would have a table for each one of those critical business units. We would launch the narrative. We would give injects to all the individual business units. But why it's so great that they're all together is that they can then start to talk to each other and talk about, well, what are you going to be doing and how is this going to, because there's upstream and downstream effects of all of this. And if they're all by themselves, they're not going to really be able to work through many things because of the downstream upstream issue. Right. And then I would go to right? And their executive exercise is designed in a much different way. Does that make sense?
Yep, it does. For each one, is it what I've heard both put good and negative here? Is it good to throw in some surprises, things that maybe didn't come up in those 90-minute phone calls, to kind of what's that spanner in the works sort of thing? Is it a good idea to do that?
Yeah, I think in the beginning, I will be honest with you, the first cyber exercise you do in any organization, you're going to find so many problems that maybe even people know about, but they've never had to live through, that I would be probably not inclined to throw too many red herrings, if you will, or too many sort of more curveballs, because I'll tell you, it's bad enough as it is for most organizations. And so I want them to walk out of the room with a big exercise headache, but that exercise headache will be good for you in the long run.
So let's say you've excuse me, losing my voice here. You're holding these workshops. Should there be, if you're identifying things, who should be in the room? I know, let's say a VP of a business unit maybe, or a director or a manager, and maybe a couple of end users. Should there be others in the room to capture these things?
That's a great question.
Identify?
That's a great question. Yeah, so when we do an exercise, what we'll do is we'll always have a group of observers, and they'll be coming either possibly from the business units, or they might be coming from other departments like audit or program management or something like that, depending on the size of the company. And what we'll do, depending on the exercise design, we'll always have observers in discrete teams, so they can actually, I can listen to a lot of things, but I'm not going to catch everything. But I want people to literally be able to watch conversations, listen to conversations, follow them around when they're trying to work something out. So observers are very, very helpful in any exercise. But I also think it depends on the group. So, for example, when I do a crisis management exercise for executives, of my 100 I do a year, I probably do 20 ones just for the C-suite of large companies. And in those exercises, the way we design them is they're often short because they don't have, of course, they're not going to give me a ton of time, but I'll get usually 2 hours, 2.5 hours maybe. Their exercises are highly structured, and the information that's coming to them is the information that they would receive at their level. So it's not deep and granular, if you will, but it's that big strategic issue. They need to understand the overall impact of the business. But who actually helps me in the delivery of that exercise? I'm not the person, even though I'm the designer and the facilitator, I'm not the one that's going to actually tell them all the bad thing that's going on in their company. I want them to feel like this is really happening. It's not going to be delivered to them by slides.
Right.
It's going to be delivered to them by the person who actually would really talk to them. So if it's the incident commander from the crisis management team, or the information security manager or director or whatever that person's title is, and they're going to be standing there saying, okay, the following things that happen, that's who's going to do it. And we will have given them a structure and a reporting system, so they will be delivering this information to the executives. They'll be answering their questions, and at the same time, they're going to ask them the big-ticket strategic issues. I need one of you to be the on-camera person on television. We have an interview in 2 hours. I need you to approve certain expenditure of large funds to replace servers, whatever those kinds of issues that might be. So we give them a report. They answer all the questions, and then we ask the questions of what we want them to do for this particular effort. And it's pretty tight and well organized, but it really leaves them with a clear message about what their job is, what the job is of the people below them, and exactly what's going to happen when this becomes public.
Well, it's interesting you just said that, because I was just thinking to ask you that in one way they're exercising or testing their plans, but at the same time, they're testing and exercising themselves based on some of those unknown triggers that may have to happen. You can test a plan all you want, but you may never actually, think about, I need to approve expenditures. So you're really doing more than that, right?
Right. So, and that's a really good comment, Alex. So when we design, for example, an executive plan versus the tactical crisis management team below them, executives, in my view, I don't care what company have worked for, whether they have 10,000 employees or 250,000. I look at an executive's job as basically 4 things: strategic policy, determining the strategic policy, approving the large expenditure of funds below the signing level of the tactical team below them, being a senior relationship manager, which means they're reaching out to big customers, regulators, government officials. You need a big person talking to the other big person, right? And then lastly is to be an on-camera spokesperson if indeed the situation is that bad. And so the exercise is designed to basically deliver on those 4 things.
I like that. I like exercises that give a more realistic feel. But do you find, at any point, have you found resistance to that? Because from my own experience, I was a part of help facilitate a really large exercise in 3 countries, 170 plus people, and there were really strong resistance against making it feel real. They really wanted to just stick to their plan. Do you find that happens in what you do?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So the answer, frankly, is no. And I think part of it is our expectation. If somebody hires us, that's what we deliver. So I of my 100 exercises I do very few of them that are what are called more of an orientation style exercise, where you have a deck of slides and you get people to walk through their plans. Those are good. Do not get me wrong. If people have a new plan or it's a new team, that's where you always start, is a basic orientation exercise. But what I say to people when I teach exercise design is please, please, please don't do all your exercises with a slide deck. You can do your first kind of orientation exercise with one, and then you can do kind of a basic tabletop. But after that, you have to stop using slides. No one in a crisis is going to be standing in front of that group with a PowerPoint presentation telling them every gory thing they need to know, right? Exactly. You are never helping them get any better. They will never learn their job if you keep feeding them all that stuff. So you have to make it experiential.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And I tried to get this one company to do it, and they just refused to. I think they were more. I think they were scared of what they might find, and that was the reason why.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, on that note, we've come to the end of our second segment. In our next segment, Regina, our last one, I'd like to talk about what we do after we've had the exercise. Now, how do we bring all that information we've discovered together, and what we need to do? We are talking with Regina Phelps today. We're talking about exercises, cyber threat exercises, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the show. Today we are talking once again with Regina Phelps, and we're talking about cyber threat exercises and the impacts they have on your organization. Regina, in the last segment, we talked about the exercises themselves. In our last segment here, what do we do after the exercise has been held? We've now just either turned the projectors off, turned the phones off, and everybody's kind of looking around the room. Okay, what next? What do we do next?
That's a great question. So first of all, let me say that when you end the exercise, what I pray and hope is that what you do is that you leave them in a big mess. And let me just briefly describe what that means. I know that sounds terrible, right? Well, the worst thing, frankly, you can do in a cyber-related exercise is to have them go through this incredibly tough experience, and then all of a sudden you magically fix them at the end and put a bow around it, and everybody walks out of the room going, well, hey, it wasn't that bad. Now, I will tell you, in all my years of design, I used to always want people to walk out of the room with kind of that positive feeling. This is the only topic in exercise design where I want people to walk out of the room with a hangover about the exercise. I want them to leave in a big mess. And I know that sounds completely crazy, Alex, and let me just explain because it ties to where you go next. Is that when you actually have had this experience, and I will tell you, my clients who have had catastrophic cyber attacks, it doesn't go away in a day or 2 days or a week or 2 weeks. In some cases, it's months. So the last thing you want them to do is think, well, it's going to go on for a few hours or maybe a day, and then it's going to be okay. No, it's not. So I want them to leave right in the middle of where, oh my gosh, we're still not up. We don't know what to do, blah, 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 blah. So that's the first thing I would say to anybody. That sets you to where you have to go next. So there's 2 things that you need to really think about even before you actually do the exercise. And first of all is how you're going to be preparing a written after-action report. Every one of your listeners knows, of course, they have to write a written after-action report after every exercise. But I will tell you this one again, because of the serious nature of this incident, can be fraught with peril. So you really want to make sure that all of the recommendations that you develop are highly factual. They're tied to the exercise learnings. Ideally, they could be tied to standards like ISO 22301 or some of the cyber-related or technology ISO standards. When I write an after-action report, I never use the word recommendations because the R word, as I call it, can be very problematic in banking and other federally regulated organizations, or even your audit department will expect that you're going to do everything that was recommended. So we use the word observations. So that just sort of helps somebody as far as being able to manage that. So we write a very concise after-action report that has all of these observations that of the exercise, but then we want to make sure that our client has the opportunity then to shop that around. That should be going to their executive sponsor. Ideally, it would be going to the C-suite of a company. Ideally, then it would be going to the board risk committee so they can actually see what actually was learned in that event. And hopefully you have a business continuity steering committee comprised of senior individuals who would be looking at that after-action report and what are you doing to follow up on all those observations/recommendations. Because the last thing you want to have happen is to do a fabulous exercise, but then nothing happens. And I'm sure you've seen that in clients of yours.
Yes. I guess
and so what you need...
help. Sorry. I guess that report would help executives also know, hey, we need to refunnel some of our resources to fix some of these gaps and put some timeframes around them, right? I guess it helps with that?
Right. Absolutely. Because they can see in black and white exactly what the issues were, and they can see where the criticality is, how it impacted the business, and then that can help them either reallocating resources or moving resources around to make sure that it's actually going to address what was learned. So the after-action report is really important. We always prepare a written after-action. We always will prepare a short slide deck to our clients, or sometimes they'll ask us to come in and actually present what our findings were to key individuals. But you want to make sure that you have had a great experience. They left that exercise with a huge exercise hangover, which was the design. They're going to be laying in bed that night for the next week, I'll tell you, thinking about that exercise. And you want to make sure that you have thought about how am I going to take this great experience and turn it into meaningful change in my organization. And you want your executive sponsor, the key leadership, and other individuals of the company to really get their hands on this and do something with it. You don't want it to languish. I'm sure you've gone back. I've gone back to clients for other topics that we've done exercises and they've hardly done anything to improve. It's like, oh my God, really? But I will tell you, in a cyber exercise that's well designed and you have a good after-action report, you can have massive change, and that is so powerful.
Well, that actually leads me to a question that, after all that time, nothing has been done, and you want people to leave with a hangover. You want them to see this report. Now, I kind of know the answer to this because I've heard you speak. How long should I have that take to get that report to them?
Our guarantee for our clients is they get it within 14 days.
Okay.
And most of our clients get them between 7. And I'll tell you why. I need to get people out of my brain so I can get another company in there. That's my own personal issue. But if you don't get it to them right away, that hangover is going to go away that you gave them, and they're not going to be inspired. So I want to give it to them as rapidly as possible. So all of your listeners should be knowing they need to get it out 7 to 14 days. If they wait a month, it's too late. All those people that went through that exercise are on to the next thing and the next problem, and you've lost your opportunity. You have to strike while the iron is hot for people to resolve these issues and to get a high priority on funding and allocation of what you need to make the changes that are required.
And they could forget some of the details behind it, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And so, and one of the things that we do in all of our exercises is that I have a great AV consultant that works in our firm that does these incredibly powerful videos. So they're when you see your company being blasted on what looks like Bloomberg News, you have a hangover for a while. So you want to make sure you've done things that really are gut feeling for the people that experience them. And that also is super helpful.
Well, believe it or not, we've got just less than 4 minutes already. So, so I'm going to give you the last 2 minutes, closing thoughts about cyber threats and the exercises, and the impacts related to them.
Mm-hmm. So let me just say that I think it's so critically important that all of your listeners really do a well-constructed cyber exercise. Every executive, every board is clamoring for this. And frankly, it's their worst nightmare. And if you certainly look at the international events that have been going on in the last week or so with the United States and Iran, there's a lot of comments online, and certainly the Department of Homeland Security have been talking about the likelihood of increased cyber attacks that this is going to be causing. And what I would say to you is that this is really a crisis like no other. I've been in practice for 37 years, and I can say this without being dramatic. I think this is the crisis of our lifetime. I think the cyber events and how it impacts the company is the crisis of our lifetime. And we need to find ways that we can make this real for the people that are in our organization so they can really understand how critical it is that we have plans and processes in place and that we've done as much as we possibly can do to be as prepared as we can be for when it does happen. And notice I did say when it does happen. Not maybe. It's going to happen to everybody. The only question is how bad is it going to be?
That's true, because you mentioned the news. You know, and you may give a whole list. I think at some point in the second segment of companies experiencing issues, it is going to happen because it's happening all the time. And just up here where I live, one of the hospitals not far away had their data, captured, so to speak. And they had to get it back. It's not all the military institutions or government institutions that are being impacted, but simple things like a hospital, which has an incredible amount of data, is now a target.
Well, just think of if you're having surgery and you can't get a lab test or you can't get pharmaceuticals and you've got somebody on the table and all of a sudden your network goes down and you can't get it up. That's right. A pretty big deal.
Yeah. Well, we've come to the end of our show. Regina, thanks again for sharing all your expertise. I really appreciate your time.
You're welcome, Alex. It's been great fun.
And of course, if you have something else you want to talk about, you can always come back again, because I know I'm going to run into you again at another conference soon, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was a great fun. Thanks for the invitation, Alex.
My pleasure. So thanks again, Regina, and everybody out there. If there's a topic you want us to talk about, please feel free, send me a note. Any adverts or sponsorships for the show, you want to advertise something, again, get a hold of me, let me know, and I'll get you some information. I'll be in San Antonio at the Continuity Insights Conference, April 20th to 22nd. I'm speaking there. And I want to thank everyone at Stone Road and boastassessment.com with their product for sponsoring the show today. And in the meantime, stay prepared, everybody. If you liked that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave a message and let me know what your thoughts are. If you'd like to be a guest on the show to talk about something related to business continuity, disaster management, COVID, personal well-being, anything that's relatable to those subjects, you can reach me through my LinkedIn profile, which is in the video description. And of course, don't forget to subscribe. In the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.